Hello, I'm Charles Hubble, your host and narrator for our podcast series, Deceived, the Moo Years. Deceived, the Moo Years is the true story of one young man's compelling, at times terrifying, former involvement with the martial arts cult Chung Moo Quan. Based on his soon-to-be-published memoir titled Deceived, A Journey into Darkness, author-producer Russell Johnson's 12-week podcast combines a powerful narrative and witness interviews with martial artists, mind control experts, and former victims of the Chung Moo Quan. The podcast will also be narrated in Korean, and Korean members of our production team will be available to add cultural insight as we consider each week who was John C. Kim. This podcast is not anti-martial arts. In fact, professional martial artists will discuss how to identify a good school from a bad one.
The following story you are about to hear is true. It took place between 1980 and 1996. Most of the names have been changed. There are other versions of the story. My name is Russell Johnson, and this one is mine.
Deceived, the Moo Years, Episode 1. Some believe he was the greatest martial arts master that ever lived. Faster and more powerful than Bruce Lee, more feared than Chuck Norris. To his followers, he had supernatural powers. Some said he could levitate and walk up the sides of buildings. To others, he appeared as a demon beast that haunted their dreams. On Deceived, we will peel away the mystery of a Korean immigrant who rose from being a janitor to running a martial arts school empire. This is the true story of the notorious martial art cult known as Chung Moo Quan, its powerful leader, Master John C. Kim, and one of the few men who would dare to oppose him.
In my wildest imagination, I could have never believed that I would be one of the people to take a stance against John C. Kim and the Chung Moo Quan organization. A series of seemingly unrelated events occurred. I guess you could call it fate or destiny. Some would say that things happen for a reason, and this is one of those stories.
In 1996, John C. Kim was the target of one of the largest tax fraud cases ever prosecuted in the state of Illinois. The U.S. government would go after him as it had the infamous gangster Al Capone, not for crimes his organization had allegedly committed, but for tax evasion. During a multi-state federal raid on the Chung Moo Quan schools, an envelope was found containing a prayer note from Kim. He asked to become one of the 10 richest men in America. His goal was to make $10 million in 10 years. But now, after nearly 3 months, the trial was over and federal prosecutors had flung the curtain wide open on the man hiding behind it.
The story of John C. Kim reminded me of the Wizard of Oz. When the government flung the curtain wide open on him, they exposed him as a coward, a humbug of a man, a real con artist.
Now Kim appeared as just a mere mortal. Weeping as he was about to be sentenced, he apologized to the court and to Pulitzer Prize-winning investigative reporter Pam Zeckman, who was believed to be on a list of targets his organization plotted to kill. In 1989, Zeckman had been a reporter for Chicago CBS affiliate WBBM. With anchors Bill Curtis, now famous for A&E investigative reports, and future NBC nightly news anchor Lester Holt, Zeckman exposed the Chung Moo Quan martial arts schools as a front for a cult.
Cults are becoming more difficult to detect because they often mask their identity behind legitimate business or service. Channel 2's investigative team has found such a group, a national chain of martial arts schools, some of which have used mind control techniques to intimidate and exploit believers. They teach a martial art called Chung Moo Quan. Pam Zeckman reports on the cult and the con.
Kim stated he meant no harm. Yet multiple witnesses had testified about this man whom the prosecutor could only describe as evil.
Pam Zeckman broke the story. She's here now with surprising new information about what really motivated John C. Kim. Pam?
Lester, this is no ordinary tax cheating scheme. We've learned today the government hopes to prove that John C. Kim, the so-called cult leader, was motivated by more than money. One government witness will testify that Kim wanted to strike out at the U.S. government and the American people.
The 3-page witness list included the names of former instructors dating back to the 1970s. One name stood out: Bruce Lee, an alias that special government investigators had given to a certain informant to protect his identity. Lee and 2 other former members, Kurt Chappell of Texas and Russell Johnson of Minnesota, played key roles in the federal case.
During the federal court trial, I went to the court clerk's office, and both my pockets, they were just full of quarters. They were kind of bulging out, and I made a copy of every court document that I could afford. One of those documents was the official witness list, and on the top of the list was the name Bruce Lee. Of course, I knew who he was. He was instrumental in the fight against the Moo.
Their efforts helped expose the schools as a dangerous and destructive cult that former members referred to as the Moo. The 3 spoke out to the media, appearing in newspapers, TV news reports, and radio interviews. They collected and shared information and public records, and they helped compile witness lists for the federal agents. They understood the risk they were taking. They came under fire from the Moo, secret surveillance, attempted lawsuits, threats of violence, and actual physical attacks. Sometimes they had to go into hiding. Still, they helped establish an organized resistance that would become known as the Anti-Moo.
I had to go into hiding a few times, even moving out of my apartment in the middle of the night, becoming homeless for a period of time. I did a lot of couch surfing during those days, and the Moo had instilled within me that the punishment for what I was doing was death.
The divinity of Master Kim. During weeks of testimony, evidence showed that Kim held a cult-like status among a large group of loyal followers who regarded him not only as a master of physical martial arts movements, but also as their spiritual leader.
John C. Kim's followers believed their martial arts master could read minds, heal bodies, and kill enemies without touching them. But today, as he headed into federal court, he seemed just a mere mortal. Students and instructors at the schools Kim operated claimed they took advantage of vulnerable people using mind control techniques that began with martial arts training. One of those students, Russ Johnson, lost $15,000 and 8 years of his life following Kim.
I see him as a cult leader, another phony messiah. I was definitely brainwashed.
But today, Kim laughed off the charge. Are you a cult leader who brainwashed thousands of students through your school?
No, I don't. My wife is Christian. My daughter is Christian. I have a hard time to speak English. I don't have any superpower.
Master Kim claimed to have reached enlightenment, and that he had passed through 7 different levels of life before coming back to this one. He said he would outlive everyone, that he left his body daily, that when he goes to heaven, he will take 18 people on his right hand and 18 people on his left hand. Kim claimed to communicate with a higher power. Some believe that Master Kim was one of the 3 angels present when Christ was born, or that Kim himself was the product of Immaculate Conception. Kim referred to himself as another Son of God. Kim claimed Jesus left a great deal of unfinished work and confusion, that he'd bailed out early because he couldn't handle it. Master Kim was here to straighten it all out. In fact, Kim claimed he could raise himself from the dead, but witness testimony suggested a brutality that was more satanic than divine.
I have never been told that John C. Kim had raised himself from the dead. Apparently, it was a story that was told in the Chicago schools. The claim was listed in the Illinois Attorney General's amended complaint for consumer fraud.
Throughout the history of the Chung Moo Quan martial arts schools, there have been reports of threats, intimidation, and beatings in Texas, Illinois, Massachusetts, and Minnesota. The victims were not limited to the students and staff. When someone came into the school to ask for information or a free lesson, instructors were trained to get in on them, to make them feel pain. This was called an attitude adjustment. It was an important part of the indoctrination process. because it set the instructor in the position of dominant and the prospective student as the submissive.
Since the mass suicide in Jonestown 11 years ago, experts have intensified their efforts to identify cults and warn the public about potential dangers. Last night, the Channel 2 investigative team disclosed that a national chain of martial arts schools is a front for a cult. Tonight, charges of violence and intimidation at some schools of Chung Moo Quan.
As I researched the Chung Moo Quan organization, I found lawsuits against the school that involved assaults in just about every state that the schools existed at the time.
Kim administered loyalty tests in which instructors were given a choice: leave the schools or die. For those who chose death, Kim would proceed to choke the instructor and then suddenly release the hold, declaring that the instructor had passed the loyalty test and would be spared. In a similar incident, Master Kim told several instructors they were worthless and should be killed. One of them asked Master Kim to kill him and allowed himself to be choked to the point of unconsciousness.
Transcripts of testimony by former instructors detail the most incredible example of Kim's control, a loyalty test given by Kim that began with this choice: leave the schools and just be, as he put it, walking dead with no future. Or, Kim said, the best option for us would be to move on to the next life, meaning we would need to die. One witness explained he chose death because there is no life without school. Both testified that Kim then choked them. One said, Kim grabbed my throat around my windpipe. He squeezed very hard to a point where it was impossible for me to breathe. Just before I blacked out, he let go of me and asked if I was sure this is what I wanted to do, and I said yes. Before blacking out again, the witness recalled that Kim let go and said that I had passed. Passed what? The prosecutor asked. I had passed a loyalty test.
During the federal trial, witnesses testified to incidents that were either ordered or inflicted by Master Kim himself, the man who would later state to the court that he meant no harm. Kim meted out punishment even when his minions didn't beg for it. After a co-defendant had told the Houston school instructors they did not need to collect money for Kim's birthday, Master Kim punched him out. He wanted to enforce the practice of skimming cash in the form of collecting birthday money. Another witness testified that Kim assaulted him and made threats in order to enforce the organization's policy regarding the regular use of phony draws to create the appearance of an income. The skimmed cash from martial arts lessons, test fees, and birthday money was collected in briefcases and bags and in various bundles. It was either driven or flown to wherever Master Kim was located at the moment. One former instructor testified how he was trained to conceal the cash by taping it to his body. In court, he demonstrated how he would tape a 1-inch wad of bills to his ankle. The lust for money combined with a passion for violence defined the Moo's fight to hamper the federal investigation. Court documents show the Moo tried to intimidate potential government witnesses. One witness testified about a threat against his father if the witness were ever to reveal the existence of the tax scheme. Another testified that his physical safety had been threatened in March 1990. When defendants suspected him of meeting with law enforcement, he was told there was a hit list. Those who had been disloyal to the schools supposedly had their bones broken. Higher-ups in the organization were allegedly interested in purchasing silencers and night scopes, and they told the witness that his mother could be found easily enough. The use of violence and intimidation was not limited to the tax fraud case. The Moo attempted to intimidate news reporter Pam Zeckman, threatening to injure her for investigating the organization. One of Master Kim's top instructors was quoted as saying Zeckman was going to have an accident, maybe be driven off the road. She'd end up dead and her brains will be turned to mush.
In court, the prosecutor also cited Kim's threats of violence, including one threat to have me killed.
The threat was that the crazy lady, which everyone understood to mean a reference to you, Miss Zeckman, needed to suffer an accident of some sort in order to put a stop to the revelation regarding their activities.
Witnesses also reported that Moo loyalists studied a video of the Pam Zeckman expose. They tried to determine who was being interviewed and predicted that person, if identified, would not be around for long once Kim found out. A former Moo instructor who opened a competing school testified that Master Kim threatened to kill him, or at least to send one of the other Minnesota instructors to beat him up. Another former instructor testified that one of the schools in Chicago closed after an alleged incident involving a fight in which a student killed a third party. In 1991, the Moo attempted to sue Kurt Chappell and Russell Johnson, along with 8 other former members and 2 cult experts for libel and slander. At the court hearing in Harris County, Texas, an instructor told Chappell in the hallway of the courthouse that he would die for Kim, and he vowed to kill anyone who tried to interfere with the schools or come between him and the master. The Moo lost the hearing. After Chappell escorted Johnson to the Houston Intercontinental Airport and saw him safely onto the plane, he was attacked inside the airport.
The violent incident happened here at Intercontinental Airport.
He hit me with an uppercut straight to the jaw, and I recognized him as an instructor.
Ex-student Kurt Chappell still had on the blood-stained shirt when he spoke to us the day of the attack back in July. Dave Failing, 11 News.
Kim had also ordered an attack on Johnson once he landed at the Minneapolis-St. Paul International Airport. But the instructor refused Kim's orders, saying it was a bad plan. This cast doubt on the instructor's loyalty. When Johnson got off the plane, he was met by 2 armed police officers and 2 cult experts who brought him to a safe house. The attack on Kurt Chappell made the local news. The instructor who attacked Chappell would later testify against Kim in the federal tax case. Kim's sexist and racist ignorance. Defense attorneys moved to exclude testimony about Kim's alleged anti-feminist attitude toward women, believing it would negatively influence the jury. One example of this attitude was a practice known as making sure the first was covered. Kim taught that it was unlucky to enroll a female on the first day of a new month. A strong male was preferred, or even a boy, just not a female. If a female came into the school and wanted to enroll, instructors would first have to check with the higher belts to see if the first had been covered. If it hadn't, the instructor would invent an excuse not to enroll her. Kim frequently used discriminatory labels. He referred to black people as well-done ones. Jews were labeled hook-noses, and he called gays Liberace types. From the book Herding the Moo by Joe Smith. God made the first man too light, Kim would start out, telling a small group of instructors at a private gathering, so white is no good. Next, he made too dark. Black, not so good either, God said. The third time, turned out just right. God made Korean.
When I started to learn how to sign up students, they taught me the terms, the names that they had for different people. It was hard for me to justify the ignorance in my mind. When I first started as a white belt, I wanted to learn martial arts. It would have been hard for me to believe that racism and sexism would be part of the curriculum.
Kim could read and control minds. According to court documents, Master Kim impressed upon his subordinates that he could read minds and control what people think. As the government has said, the record is replete with evidence about how Kim obtained the trust and devotion of his followers by virtue of his special physical martial arts abilities and his professed special mental and supernatural powers. It is possible that some co-defendants believe Kim would use his power to control and sway the minds of the jury. So one has to wonder how they felt after the first day of the trial when, according to newspaper reports, Kim was weeping at the defense table. The man they had once believed could speak 8 different languages and had been in the U.S. since 1972 now claimed he had a hard time speaking English and needed to wear headphones to listen to the court's Korean translator.
I often wondered how the instructors, the co-defendants, felt during the court trial as they sat and watched John C. Kim fake that he had a hard time speaking English. Kim was the only one with a private attorney. The rest had public defenders. His defense was that he was no more than a puppet, an ignorant Korean man who was used, taken advantage of by the co-defendants. They must have felt betrayed by John C. Kim. How could they not?
During the trial, one co-defendant disavowed his belief in Master Kim, according to a psychological report. Prior to his becoming involved in the Moo, he had achieved his goal of becoming one of the youngest train engineers in the country. Like many others, he would give up his career dreams to become a Chung Moo Quan instructor. The report speculated that it was unlikely he would have gotten into trouble with the law if not for his obsessive involvement with the Moo. Another witness from Minnesota testified that he gave up his dreams of becoming a dentist to become a Moo instructor. When reporter Pam Zeckman asked him about this outside of court, he replied, "That's not true. He lie."
Brainwashed, he said, to give up his dream of becoming a dentist and turn over his life and his money to Kim. It was the first testimony from a follower who once believed Kim had supernatural powers and used cult tactics to command obedience from his students and his staff, a charge Kim denies. He left his family, he sold his car, he believed that you had special powers, that you could read minds.
That's not true, he lied.
One of the co-defendants, a national instructor from Minnesota who was second in line after Kim, wrote a letter to second-degree instructors a few years prior to the trial. In part, it read, "I respect Master John C. Kim deeply because I care about myself deeply. Master John C. Kim has spent 50 years to reach the knowledge of Chung Moo. Without direction, I could spend 500 years and not reach 1/10 of that knowledge. For me, it would be like being lost in a jungle without a guide. Perhaps by chance, I could find my way out. I do not want to take that risk." The same instructor would be sentenced to 5 years in prison for his role in the tax fraud conspiracy. Upon his release, he did not return to the Moo. Apparently, he found his way out of the jungle. In October 1990, Russell Johnson would begin a quest for answers. What was the Moo organization? And the even bigger question, who was John C. Kim? He researched and collected everything he could find. Much of the information about the Moo that can be found today on the internet came from his research. By 1995, Johnson was working at the information retrieval desk at a local library. He had been trained in public record retrieval and started working for a private investigation firm. After the indictment of Master Kim in 1995, Russell Johnson began a successful email campaign through the news group Rec Martial Arts to persuade Court TV to cover the trial. The night before the trial began, Johnson and the confidential informant whom the feds called Bruce Lee were interviewed by Court TV reporter Alan Levine. Bruce Lee would appear in shadow, and his voice would be altered to conceal his identity. On Court TV, Johnson wore a T-shirt that read Vail, Colorado, where he now lived. He had left his home and family in Minnesota, but he was no longer running and hiding. It was time for him to stop being afraid, and time for the other side to start. During his stance against the Moo, Johnson accepted that the worst they could do to him was kill him. But he knew that if he could accept the prospect of his own death, the Moo would no longer have any control over him. It was not that he didn't feel fear. Rather, he accepted it and faced it. He wore the Vail, Colorado T-shirt on Court TV as a sign of defiance.
When you judge whether or not a threat is real, there are a few questions to ask. First, has the person or the organization made threats in the past? Second, do they have the ability to carry out the threat? Third, has the person or organization made good on these threats in the past? In this case of the Chung Moo Quan organization, the answer to all these questions is yes.
The next day, CI Bruce Lee and Johnson would meet in the courthouse lobby again with Court TV reporter Alan Levine along with WBBM reporter Pam Zeckman. During the previous 5 years, Johnson had become outspoken against the Moo. Now he was not only about to face the man behind it all, he was going to identify Kim for the reporters. His adrenaline level was high, along with his fear. He was about to come face to face with the man he now considered a monster. That fear would soon be replaced with a giggling smirk as he cast his eyes upon the 63-year-old Kim, whose signature permed hair created a Korean fro that rose at least 6 inches from the top of his head. Russell Johnson no longer felt a mystical aura around Kim. The spell was broken. In the courthouse lobby, reporter Alan Levine asked, "Mr. Kim, did you brainwash students?" Kim responded, laughing in a broken English voice and waving his hand in front of his face, saying, "I don't even know what brainwashing is." Reporter Pam Zeckman said, "They believed you had supernatural powers." Kim laughed and shook his head, saying, No, I have a hard time speaking English. I have no supernatural powers." The master, who had once appeared to Johnson as mystical, now seemed comical, with his fake broken English dialect and the Korean fro.
When John C. Kim cooked up this defense, I don't think that he thought about the reporters questioning him in the courthouse lobby and how it might look in front of the TV cameras. I don't think he probably thought about the media being there at all. I watched John C. Kim claim that he had a hard time speaking English, and it was like a skit from Saturday Night Live. As the trial played out, he dropped the whole bit and he began to speak perfect English.
After Kim was found guilty, Pam Zeckman asked about his conviction.
It's not fair. No.
Why isn't it fair?
Because it's not true.
According to the jury, however, it was true. Kim, along with 13 other co-defendants, would be sentenced to 5 years in prison. Next week on Deceived, The Moo Years, Chapter 2. When you stop at a coffee shop or a pizza place, you don't expect to worry about being drawn into a cult, but there it was, right next door. Deceived, The Moo Years confirms that John C. Kim passed away on February 14th, 2016. He was 82 years old. The source of the information is his death certificate. The cause of death is listed as cardiogenic shock, myocardial infarction, coronary artery disease. Students believe that John C. Kim held the power to cure almost anything. The training was believed to build health and longevity. Kim's death at 82 was due to coronary artery disease that often develops over decades. There was no published obituary or public notice of his death in 2016.
Deceived, The Moo Years is a production of Deja Moo, LLC. Recorded and produced by Alive and Social Podcast Network. Russell Johnson, producer and writer. Charles Hubble, host and narrator. David Bruskin, editor. Russ Meyer, co-writer and editor. Aaron Troe, sound producer. Brian Price, audio editor. Wyatt Sarber, sound engineering. Woon Tae Ryu is our advisor in South Korea. Authentic is our advertising representative. Deceived, The Moo Years is represented by Young Entertainment Law.